Okay, so electric cars have been around since the 1800s, and the technology is rapidly improving, with Tesla selling 6.2 million cars to date, and last year alone they sold 1.1 million. This just shows you how insane it is. Shows you how many people are embracing electrical vehicles, which brings us to today's question. Can electrical vehicles survive in Africa? Okay, so let's start off with what an EV is. An EV is an electrical vehicle, meaning that it uses electricity to move, as opposed to internal combustion engines that use petrol, diesel. So the main difference is in the battery, and the distance it travels with the battery is known as range. More on that later. So in trying to answer if EVs can survive in Africa, we have to look at some factors. The number one factor is obviously cost. How expensive is it compared to other cars on the market? Number two are also the cost associated with using an EV. So that is charging, etc. Also have to look at range. Range is the amount of kilometers or miles an EV travels from a full battery charge. Supporting infrastructure like charging ports. So we have to look at those factors to understand if EVs can realistically survive in Africa. So you ever noticed how every summer it keeps getting warmer and warmer? Well, that's because it is getting warmer due to greenhouse emissions that destroy the ozone layer. So the ozone layer is basically this big protection that we have from the sun. If we didn't have that, we would be dead from heat radiation. So the ozone layer protects the Earth from the sun in basic terms. And 24% of these greenhouse emissions come from internal combustion engines, which in translation, the cars are destroying the planet, which everyone knows, obviously. Okay, so let's talk about the factors. Number one, cost. And when we are talking about cost, we are directly comparing them to other options in the market, which is the big Japanese car import market. On that note, EVs lose by a large margin because importing a used car from Japan is way cheaper than buying any car. For example, the Tesla Model 3 or the Model Y are the cheaper options, and they cost around 30 to 50,000 US dollars, which is more than the average yearly salary of an African in the middle class. But there are cheaper options. Second-hand EVs drastically lose values, and that is due to a lot of factors, which is a video on its own. But overall, EVs are more cheaper in the long run as opposed to IC, internal combustion engine cars. Talking about cost and hearing how expensive all these EVs go up to, that doesn't mean that's the end of the road. There are cheaper options, like for example the BYD Seagull that goes for around 9 to 12,000, or the Volkswagen Lavid that's around 20,000. Also an African brand called Mureza that's making EVs that goes for 225,000 rands, which is around 18,000 US dollars. That is the Shona sedan, if I'm not mistaken. That's a very affordable car, considering that it's new. People can start ordering in 2025. Now it all comes down to, would you buy a car for 20,000 that looks like this, or would you buy a car for 20,000 that looks like this? So it goes down to choice and preference. Because to be honest, some of these EVs, they're not aesthetically pleasing, to say the least. But if it's for the greater good of the planet, then as we said earlier, range is the distance that a fully charged battery can travel. And we have to start with the electric Phantom. That was Phantom. That was made in the 1800s. And this was the start. And it could go up to 18 miles and 40 miles per hour, which was iconic at the time, costing 2,000 US dollars. We should be around this much in today's money. But that's literally 200 years ago. Now, an average EV can go around 300 to 600 kilometers off just one charge, which is insane that you can travel 600 kilometers just using your battery. But range, you have to take into consideration two scenarios. Scenario number one is you live in a city and you go to work, come back, go to work. The way you would use an EV is very different. And keep in mind that in cities, it's usually congested. meaning that there's traffic jams. And there's what's called regenerative braking, whereby the battery keeps recharging every time you are using the brakes. So you can survive off just one full charge. Okay, now scenario number 2 is road trips. Some cities in Africa are actually closer to each other than usual. But let's say you want to travel to a city which is way more than the range, then you need to charge and charging. So when you are buying an EV, it's very crucial to take into consideration the range, factoring how you will use the EV essentially. Because it is an electric car, it has a battery and it has to be charged, just like our normal phones. And there are different levels of charging. Level number 1 is where you basically plug your EV charger into a normal circuit, 120V circuit, and this is great for overnight. And also if you use your car in the range of a city and it charges overnight. I said overnight twice now. Now, level number 2 is home charging stations. And for this one, you might need an electrician where they put a charger next to your distribution box that supplies your home. And this is obviously way faster than level number 1, but you might need a professional for this one. Now, level number 3 is DC fast charger. These are the charging stations, and these are seemingly producing extreme numbers. For example, some EVs can charge up to 70% in just 30 minutes or less than an hour, which is very insane. Now, this automatically takes us to power generation, because to charge you need power, and most African countries are failing to meet the normal demands of the population. That's seen in high load shedding and my blackouts. Even in South Africa, Eskom. And this is so crazy because there was a study done, and for some countries like Nigeria, they need to 4x their current power generation in order for EVs to effectively be in use in their countries. A quick fix is installing a solar system that can charge your car overnight. And to have such a system in place is definitely not cheap. But as we have seen even in Zimbabwe, more and more companies are partnering with the government to provide this infrastructure for EVs. For example, BYD is partnering with the government of Zimbabwe, and they've already established charging ports in Gweru. So this is something to really take into consideration if you want to buy an EV and if EVs can even survive in Africa. So still on the topic of power and electricity, which is a big thing, there's something that's called vehicle to grid. Okay, so let me explain in the most simplest way I can. So when everyone wakes up in the morning around 5 to 10, they're using electricity to boil water, iron, boom, boom, boom. That's called peak hour. As also, that's the same for when people come back from work during the evening, where they're using a lot of electricity. That's also called peak hour. But then what happens between the morning and the evening when no one is using and electricity is being generated? Essentially, it's going to waste. So some very smart people from a country I don't know at the moment figured out that what if we could store all this energy that's not being used during peak hours, and then when everyone is now using electricity, feed back that power back into the grid. And they found out that an electric car as a battery can be used as a source of energy. So electric cars are coming with what's called bidirectional charging, where essentially they can receive power and also give out power. That's vehicle to grid. Some advanced countries, they've already started it and rolling it out. The owners of the EVs are compensated. Not sure how the whole system works, but that's something to really consider for the future, vehicle to grid. Vehicle to grid, something else. Now, just because it's an electric car doesn't mean that it's 100% free. You still have to pay for the electricity that you charge for. And for this example, we're going to use Zimbabwe. 0.27 cents is equal to 1 kilowatt hour. And we're going to compare with fuel as to which one is the cheaper option. Okay, so the math will be 1 kilowatt hour multiplied by the number of kilowatt hours needed to fully charge a battery. So 0.25 cents times 100, which brings us to $27. So $27 essentially in Zimbabwe can fully charge a medium-sized EV that can travel around 300 to 600 kilometers. And if you're using petrol is now $1.50. And to fill most normal sized cars, it's around $40. $40 which travels essentially around the range of 400 kilometers. So in essence, you travel more. If you're using an EV, you travel more kilometers while spending less money. And to sort of top that off, we have to talk about the inherent benefits that EV has, not only to the planet, but to your bank account. Okay, so to kind of close that off, whether or not EVs can survive in Africa is only time can tell. But those are the factors that you have to consider. And I would love to see more EVs on the road, in Africa especially, as they are environmentally friendly. And thank you very much for tuning in. Stay tuned for more videos like this. Until next time, peace.